The summer rain in Nagasaki was unlike anywhere else. It fell soft and warm, like a secret being whispered across tiled rooftops and narrow alleyways. Aiko stood at the tram station, her umbrella steady in the drizzle, waiting for her usual evening ride home from the hospital. The lights of the city shimmered on the wet pavement, and everything felt muted, almost dreamlike. It was on that evening, with the scent of earth and ocean in the air, that Aiko's phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name that always brought comfort: Haruna. Her best friend since childhood. The message was short and simple. "Can I come over tonight? I need to talk." There was no emoji, no punctuation. Just that. And Aiko knew instantly that something was wrong. Haruna was the kind of person who brought light into every room. Even when they were children, it was always Haruna who laughed the loudest, who dared the furthest, who danced barefoot in the rain. They had grown up together in the same neighborhood, just a few blocks from the Peace Park, running between paper lanterns during summer festivals and hiding under temple steps when the sun became too hot. Now in their mid-20s, Aiko worked long shifts at Nagasaki City Hospital while Haruna ran a small craft shop near the Soa Shrine. Life had changed, but their bond had not. Or so Aiko thought. That evening, Haruna arrived without her usual bounce. Her hair was damp from the rain, her clothes too plain, too gray for someone who used to love color. She didn't speak at first. She just stepped inside, removed her shoes, and stood in the hallway of Aiko's flat as though unsure what to do next. Aiko brewed green tea. The sound of boiling water filled the silence like a placeholder for words too hard to say. They sat in the living room. The only light came from a small lamp beside the sofa. Outside, the rain picked up again, tapping gently on the glass. Haruna held her cup, both hands wrapped tightly around it, but she didn't drink. "I haven't told anyone this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Aiko felt her heartbeat quicken.
She didn't speak.
She waited. Haruna took a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on a crack in the wooden table. "When I was 15, something happened at home. Something bad. I never told anyone. Not even you." Aiko leaned forward slightly, her throat dry. She wanted to reach out, but something about Haruna's posture made her stay still. "There's more," Haruna said, her voice even quieter now. "But if I tell you, you have to promise. You can't ever see me the same way again." Aiko blinked, her mind spinning. The girl who danced in the rain. The friend who made her laugh during exams. The person who had stood by her when her father died. That girl was now sitting before her, carrying something too heavy to hold alone. And for the first time in their long friendship, Aiko didn't know what to say. The rain outside continued to fall, soft and steady, like tears too old to cry. The silence that followed Haruna's words seemed to stretch on endlessly. The low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Suddenly, every sound in Aiko's flat felt exaggerated, almost intrusive. But still, she said nothing. She just waited, letting her friends speak on her own terms. Haruna finally looked up, her eyes red but dry. There was no visible tear, only the weight of someone who had carried too much for far too long. "It started the year my father lost his job," Haruna began. "He changed after that. At first, it was just shouting. He'd drink, come home angry, knock over chairs, slam doors. But then it turned into something else." She clenched her jaw, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the teacup on the table. Aiko noticed how her fingertips were white from the pressure. "There was one night. I remember hiding under the floorboards," she said, her voice cracking. "Our house in Urakami had a trapdoor in the kitchen. It was meant for earthquakes or storms. But I used it to hide. I would lie there between dust and spiders, pressing my hands over my mouth so he couldn't hear me breathe." Aiko's throat tightened, her chest aching. The floorboards. She remembered playing hide and seek in Haruna's house when they were young. She had always thought that trapdoor was just an old-fashioned feature of a traditional Nagasaki home. She had no idea it had served as a refuge from horror. "I stayed there for hours sometimes," Haruna continued. He'd rage, scream, break things, then pass out on the floor. My mother, she never said anything. She just cleaned up. It was like she was trapped too, in a silence deeper than mine. Harna looked away again, this time towards the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, but droplets still clung to the glass like little pearls. "You know what's strange?" she said with a hollow laugh. "I used to count those drops to calm myself. 1, 2, 3. I believed that if I counted to 100, he'd stop. Like it was magic." Aiko wanted to cry, but she didn't. She had to be strong, because this moment wasn't about her. It was about the girl who had once taught her how to make origami cranes in the schoolyard, now revealing a life hidden in shadows. "I never told anyone," Haruna whispered, "because if I did, it would become real. And I wasn't ready for that. I needed it to be something I could fold away like paper and forget." Aiko finally reached across the table, her hand resting gently over Haruna's. It was a silent promise. Not of fixing things. Not of pretending to understand. Just of being there. The night deepened. Neither of them said anything more. They just sat together in the quiet, as the city of Nagasaki exhaled beneath them, its lights flickering in the distance like fading memories. A week passed before Haruna reached out again. Aiko had spent each day thinking about her, wondering if she had said enough, or too little. But when Haruna finally called, her voice was lighter, steadier, like the weight had shifted, even if only slightly. They met again, this time not at Aiko's flat, but on the hill of Inasa, overlooking Nagasaki's glowing nightscape. The city below was a field of stars, scattered across land and sea. It was Haruna's idea to come here. She said she wanted to show Aiko something. They stood in silence for a moment, wind brushing through their hair. "There's a shop not far from here," Haruna said softly. "It's old. Almost forgotten. My grandmother used to bring me there when I was small. She said it was magic." They walked down a narrow alley behind the observation deck until they reached an old wooden building tucked beneath an overhang of pine trees. The sign was faded, but the bell above the door still chimed brightly as Haruna pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of cedar and thyme. Wooden shelves lined with trinkets, charms, paper lanterns, and dolls. Dozens of them, all made of glass. Each doll was no taller than a handspan, intricately painted in delicate hues of red, gold, and white. Some were smiling. Others looked as though they might cry. Aiko felt a shiver run down her spine. "Oba-chan used to say they held memories," Haruna whispered. "That each one was made with a breath of someone's pain. And that the dolls carried it, so the person wouldn't have to." Aiko turned to her, eyebrows raised. "That sounds like a fairy tale." Haruna smiled faintly. "Maybe. But when I was little I believed it. After my father. When things got worse, I'd come here, pick one, and pretend I was leaving my pain inside it." She led Aiko to a shelf near the back. "This one's mine." The doll was dressed in a tiny crimson kimono, its glass face painted with gentle brushstrokes. Unlike the others, its eyes were closed. "I imagined it sleeping," Haruna said. "So, it wouldn't feel anything." Aiko looked at the doll, her throat dry. The idea that a child could create something so sorrowful and yet so beautiful made her chest ache. She reached out but stopped just short of touching it. "You still come here?" she asked. "Only when I need to remember," Haruna said. "Not everything. Just enough to remind myself that I survived." The bell above the door jingled as another gust of wind passed outside. They left quietly, stepping back into the cool air of the Nagasaki night. Haruna didn't say anything more. She didn't have to. That glass doll, sleeping forever in the back of the shop, said enough. It was a rainy afternoon when Haruna invited Aiko to her family home. Aiko had never been there before. Nestled on the hillside just outside Nagasaki's main district, the house stood in quiet solitude, surrounded by maple trees that rustled softly in the wind. Its wooden panels and sliding doors gave it an aged, almost fragile elegance. Haruna's grandmother had passed away some years earlier, and the home now sat mostly unused. Yet it held a preserved stillness, like time had stepped aside and chosen not to disturb it. "I haven't been here in a while," Haruna admitted as they stepped inside. "But there's something I want to show you." The interior smelled of tatami and dust. Faded photographs hung in the hallway. Aiko noticed one of Haruna as a young girl, standing beside her grandmother in a summer yukata, both smiling, both unaware of the shadows that would come. They moved to a small room near the back, one with a low table, paper walls, and a creaking floor. Haruna knelt down and carefully slid aside one of the tatami mats. Beneath it was a wooden hatch. "I used to hide things here," she said, lifting it. "Things I didn't want anyone to find." Aiko leaned in, curiosity rising. From the small compartment, Haruna pulled out a tin box. She opened it slowly, and inside were several folded notes, a child's drawing of a family, and, at the very bottom, a photograph. It was a photo of Haruna, no older than 7, sitting in the lap of a man whose face had been scratched out with ink. Aiko stared at it, stunned. Haruna's hand trembled slightly as she held it. "That's the only picture I ever kept of him. My father." The silence that followed was dense. Aiko wanted to speak, to reach out, to comfort, but the atmosphere felt sacred, like any word might fracture it. "I hated him," Haruna said at last. "But part of me still clung to this. I don't know why. Maybe because it proved I didn't imagine it all. That he was real. That what happened was real." Aiko nodded, her voice soft. "Memory can be cruel like that." Haruna placed the photograph back in the box, carefully, as though it might shatter. "I used to think if I kept it hidden, maybe the pain would stay buried too." "But it didn't?" Aiko asked. Haruna smiled sadly. "No. It found ways to leak through the cracks." She paused, then closed the box and put it back beneath the floor. "I'm tired of hiding him," she said. "But I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive either." "You don't have to," Aiko said gently. "Not now. Maybe not ever." They sat there in silence, two friends bound by unspoken understanding. Outside, the rain continued to fall softly, washing over the leaves, the roof, and the memory of a man whose presence lingered like a ghost beneath the floorboards. Aiko returned home that evening with Haruna's story echoing in her mind. She could not stop thinking about that photo, scratched through in anger, hidden for years beneath a house that whispered grief in every creaking corner. That night, sleep eluded her. Instead, she wandered through the quiet corridors of her own memory, wondering how much of Haruna's pain she had truly seen over the years. It dawned on her how much Haruna had carried alone. The next morning, Aiko took a different route to school. Instead of the usual tram, she walked along the old stone path that led past the bell tower, one of the oldest structures in Nagasaki, perched above the city, like a sentinel of time. The bell hadn't rung in years. It had once marked hours for the neighborhood, but was silenced after a minor earthquake cracked its foundation. Yet people still passed by, reverently, as if waiting for it to speak again. As Aiko approached, she saw an elderly man kneeling at its base, lighting incense. She paused, unsure whether to intrude, but something about the quietness of the act drew her in. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Do you come here often?" The man turned, his face worn and kind. "Every week," he said. "For my daughter. She died long ago." Aiko felt a pang in her chest. "I'm sorry." He nodded, staring at the incense smoke curling upwards. "She used to listen to this bell every day. I like to think she still does." They stood in silence for a while. Then the man said something that lingered with her. "Time does not heal," he said. "It only teaches you how to carry the weight." Those words sat with Aiko all day. That afternoon, she and Haruna walked home together. The cherry trees lining the street had just begun to bloom, their pale petals falling like quiet snowfall. Aiko hesitated, then shared her encounter at the bell tower. Haruna listened, her expression unreadable. But when Aiko repeated the old man's words, something shifted. She stopped walking, her eyes fixed on the falling petals. "I always thought I needed to forget," she whispered. "To feel free. But maybe remembering," she continued, "is its own kind of freedom." Aiko gently took her hand. They continued walking without another word, the silence no longer heavy, but shared, like a promise. The bell tower did not ring that day. But in its silence, something else had spoken. 2 weeks passed. The cherry blossoms were beginning to fall in full. Streets and rivers wore soft pink coats, and spring festivals began lighting up the evenings in Nagasaki. But Aiko noticed that something had shifted in Haruna. She smiled a little more now. She spoke in longer sentences. But most importantly, she no longer avoided the silence between them. That silence had become a resting place, not a hiding one. One Friday afternoon, after school, Haruna turned to Aiko outside the school gates and said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." They walked to Haruna's house together, the same house Aiko had visited just once before. The house still felt cold, still too big for the two people living in it. But today, Haruna walked with purpose. She led Aiko into her bedroom, then knelt by a small wooden box under her bed. "I found these the night after we went to the bell tower," she said. "I hadn't opened this in years." Inside were dozens of letters, their edges curled, written on delicate washi paper. Haruna picked one up and handed it to Aiko. "I wrote them all to my sister." Aiko unfolded the letter gently. It was dated 3 years ago. In it, Haruna had written about her first piano recital without Emmy and how her hands had trembled on the keys. The words bled with pain but carried a thread of yearning. She had wanted to share each moment with Emmy, even in absence. "I never posted any of them," Haruna whispered. "I didn't know where to send them." They spent the next hour reading through the letters together. Some were full of grief. Others were angry, blaming Emmy for leaving her behind. But most were simply quiet updates on daily life, a new recipe she had tried, a book she had liked, a dream she had woken from crying. "They were all I had," Haruna said, her voice cracking. "Talking to her, even if only through paper, kept me alive." Aiko reached over and took her hand. "These are not just letters. They're proof you loved her with everything you had." Later that night, Haruna walked alone to the edge of Nagasaki port. She stood there, clutching one of the letters in her fist. She read it aloud to the sea, her voice breaking in the salt wind. Then, slowly, she folded the letter into a paper boat and set it afloat on the dark waves. One by one, she released 5 more, each one sailing away like a farewell whispered too long in silence. Back on the shore, she stood still for a long time, not to watch them disappear, but to let herself remain. The following week arrived quietly, as though Nagasaki itself was holding its breath. The rain returned, light and constant, tapping gently on rooftops and windows. It was the sort of weather that made people whisper, made thoughts louder inside the mind. In the music room, Aiko practiced a new piece, a slow, haunting melody with hesitant pauses. The keys responded like sighs. Haruna sat beside her on the bench, watching her fingers rather than the sheet music. "You changed the middle section," Haruna said softly. "I did," Aiko replied. It felt like it needed a breath, like someone remembering. Haruna smiled faintly. "It sounds like longing." They sat in silence again, but this time, it was not awkward. It was heavy, yet peaceful. Then Aiko asked, "Do you still play at home?" Haruna shook her head. "I haven't touched the piano in Emmy's room since she died." "Would you?" Aiko asked. "With me?" That Sunday, Aiko visited again. The house felt slightly warmer. Haruna's mother greeted her this time, quiet but not cold. She brought tea and disappeared into the garden, leaving them alone. Haruna unlocked the door to Emmy's room. The piano sat in the corner, covered in a white sheet, the same one from that terrible night. Haruna hesitated at the threshold, her hand trembling slightly. Aiko waited. Haruna stepped inside. She gently lifted the cover, revealing the polished wood beneath. Dust had gathered along the edges, but the keys remained pristine, untouched. She sat down. Aiko sat beside her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Haruna pressed a single note, a low C. It hung in the air like a ghost finding its voice. Slowly, they began to play, one hand each. Haruna's right, Aiko's left. It was clumsy at first, then graceful. The notes wove around each other, speaking in a language neither had spoken in years. Halfway through the piece, Haruna paused. Her eyes filled, but she didn't stop. She pressed on, breath shaking. When the final chord faded, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of release, of memory, of love. They sat there for a long time, fingers still resting on the keys. Then Haruna whispered, "I thought playing again would feel like betrayal." Aiko shook her head. "It's not betrayal. It's remembering her the way she deserves to be remembered." That evening, as they left the room, Haruna turned back once more. The piano gleamed in the fading light. For the first time in 3 years, the door to Emmy's room remained open. Aiko returned home that evening with the memory of the music still echoing in her chest. Something had shifted in Haruna. The way she held herself, the way her voice no longer wavered every time Emmy's name was mentioned. It was subtle, but undeniable. The next morning, as she entered her room, Aiko noticed something on her desk. A small envelope with no name on it. The handwriting was delicate. She opened it cautiously. Inside was a letter. Her heart stopped as she read the first line. "Dear Emmy." It wasn't her writing. It was Haruna's. "I don't know where you are, or if you even exist somewhere I could reach. But I've wanted to talk to you every day since you left. And I never could. So I'm writing this now, in case there's a way you might hear me." The letter was raw, trembling in its honesty. Haruna had written about the guilt she carried, the anger she buried, and the love that refused to fade. She wrote of the day Emmy died, how she screamed when the paramedics covered her with that white sheet, how she hated the world for moving on while she couldn't. "Sometimes I felt you were punishing me for living. I didn't deserve to smile again. But then someone sat beside me and smiled anyway. She didn't try to fix me. She just waited." Aiko felt her breath hitch. "You would have liked her, Emmy. She's stubborn and gentle and plays music like it holds the sky together. She doesn't know this yet, but she brought me back to life." By the end of the letter, Aiko's cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't noticed falling. There was no signature, just a drawing of 3 cherry blossoms. Later that evening, Aiko returned to the hill where they had first shared stories, a quiet slope behind the school overlooking the Nagasaki skyline. She brought the letter with her. The wind was soft, the sky painted with pink and gold. She lit a match and held the corner of the letter to it. The paper curled, blackened, and drifted upwards in embers. Aiko whispered, "I think she heard you." As the ashes danced into the breeze, Aiko felt an ache loosen inside her chest. It wasn't gone, but it was gentler now, like a scar instead of a wound. The next day, Haruna met her at the gate. She didn't say anything, just looked at Aiko, eyes questioning. Aiko nodded. Haruna smiled just a little. They walked into school together, side by side. The weight of the unspoken finally laid to rest. The days grew shorter as autumn crept into Nagasaki. Leaves scattered like whispers across the narrow streets. Aiko noticed that Haruna became quieter in the mornings, her smiles more fleeting. The healing felt fragile, as if a single word or glance might shatter it all. One chilly afternoon, Aiko received a message from Haruna. Just a place and time. The old shrine at the edge of town, sunset. Curious and a little apprehensive, Aiko arrived early. The shrine was deserted, bathed in the golden light of the dying day. The air smelled faintly of incense and fallen leaves. Haruna was there, sitting on the wooden steps, hands clasped tightly. Her face was pale, shadows deep beneath her eyes. Without greeting, she handed Aiko a small box wrapped in cloth. "I found this in Emmy's things," she said quietly. "I didn't know what to do with it." Inside was a delicate music box, its surface etched with tiny sakura blossoms. Aiko wound the key gently, and a soft melody floated into the air, a tune Emmy used to hum as a child. Haruna's voice broke the silence. "I never told you everything. There was more than just the accident. Emmy was scared. Of something, someone." Aiko's heart tightened. Haruna looked up, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I think someone wanted to hurt her, but I was too afraid to see it. Or maybe I didn't want to." They sat side by side in silence, the music box's tune lingering between them. The peaceful shrine held its quiet vigil as the sun slipped below the horizon. The final days of autumn brought a quiet resolve to Haruna. The secret she had carried for so long was no longer hers to bear alone. With trembling hands, she confided in Aiko the truth about Emi's fear, the shadow that haunted her friend's last days. It was a man from their past, someone who had crossed boundaries, someone whose anger was hidden behind a mask of kindness. Emi had tried to protect everyone by keeping silent, but Haruna had finally found the courage to speak out. Together, Aiko and Haruna visited the places where Emi's fear had lived, the empty alleyways, the cold corners of their school, the distant house on the hill. Each step was painful, a reminder of the love lost and the innocence shattered. But it was also a step toward healing. In the quiet of Nagasaki's early winter, the two friends stood beneath the lantern-lit streets, hands clasped tightly. They did not need words to say what was left unsaid. Aiko looked at Haruna and saw not only a friend burdened by grief, but a soul strengthened by truth and love. And in that moment, beneath the soft glow of the city lights, they both understood that even in the darkest shadows, there is always a light waiting to be found.